The jungle was still, eerily still. Not a breeze stirred the leaves, not a bird chirped. The sun filtered through the dense canopy in golden beams, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. And in the middle of that silence stood Tao, a massive bull elephant, ears gently flapping, trunk low to the ground, sensing something off. Tao had wandered slightly ahead of the herd, as he often did when the morning air was cool and heavy with dew. Behind him, his mate, Sira, was grazing near the riverbank, her steps slow and rhythmic, her presence calm like the river's flow. She was the gentle center of their small family, the glue, the light. But something changed instantly. The birds exploded into flight from the treetops, shrieking. The monkeys screamed and scattered. And then came the sound. Not a roar, not a trumpet, a scream, high, choked, strangled. Tao froze, then turned. And what he saw, Sira flailing, her legs collapsing beneath her, a thick, coiled shape wrapped around her neck. A python. No, a monstrous python, its scales glinting like armor, its muscles constricting with every breath she tried to take. For a moment, the world stopped. And then, Tao bellowed, a sound that ripped through the trees like thunder, a sound not heard in that jungle for decades. It was fury, it was grief, it was terror turned to action, and it would not stop until either he or the snake did. Tao's bellow wasn't just sound, it was war. Every beast in the jungle knew it. Birds burst into flight, monkeys scattered like leaves in a storm, and even the crocodiles in the nearby river slipped beneath the surface, sensing the eruption of something primal. Tao charged. His massive feet pounded the ground, cracking roots and flattening ferns as he barreled toward the nightmare unfolding beneath the trees. Sira was on her side now, her legs twitching, her trunk flailing weakly. The python had her in a deathlock, its coils tightened around her neck and chest, squeezing with pitiless precision. Tao didn't hesitate. With a trumpet that could split stone, he slammed his tusks into the python's midsection. The sound of impact, bone-crushing and wet, echoed through the jungle like a clap of judgment. The python thrashed, releasing Sira just enough for her to gasp. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with pain, but still alive. That was all Tao needed. He reared up, his shadow massive and terrible against the broken sunlight, and brought his front legs crashing down on the snake's body. Again and again. The ground trembled, and then silence. The python, battered and broken, slithered away slowly, dragging what was left of its twisted coils back into the underbrush, vanishing like a nightmare at dawn. Tao turned back to Sira. She wasn't moving. He nudged her with his trunk, gently, pleadingly. He rumbled a soft call, the same one he had used for years when they foraged together or bathed in the river with their young. But she didn't answer, and so he lowered himself beside her, pressing his massive body close, shielding her from the world. The herd had heard the scream and the bellow and the crashing. One by one they arrived, quiet, cautious, reverent. The matriarch came first, her old eyes wide with sorrow. Then the calves, then the others. They formed a circle around Tao and Sira, not out of fear, but out of respect. What had just happened was something ancient, something sacred, and far from over. Tao stood over Sira like a guardian carved from stone, his breath heaving, his sides rising and falling with the weight of grief and rage and something else. Disbelief. He nudged her again, softer this time, his trunk tracing the outline of her ear, the curve of her jaw. She was still warm, still there, but unmoving. The rest of the herd stayed back, instinctively giving Tao space. They had never seen him like this, silent, trembling, hollow-eyed. For years he had been the quiet one, the protector, never a leader, never loud. But now something inside him had cracked wide open, and in that silence the forest began to respond. A single calf, Sira's youngest, broke from the line. He ambled forward clumsily, eyes wide and wet, and nestled his tiny body against his mother's flank. When she didn't move, he let out a small, broken trumpet. Tao lowered his head until it met the calf's. For a moment, neither moved. And then in the distance, a roar. But it wasn't an animal. It was human, Tao's ears twitched, eyes narrowing toward the jungle's edge. He knew that sound, the shout of men, the clatter of boots, the metallic clang of tools, cutters, poles, restraints, poachers. They had followed the python's trail. Perhaps they had released it near the watering hole to trap whatever was unlucky enough to drink. Syrah had always been curious, too bold for her own good, and now they were coming back. Tao rose slowly, massive, silent. The calf stayed hidden behind his legs. Tao turned back to Syrah. She wasn't moving. He nudged her with his trunk, gently, pleadingly. He rumbled a soft call, the same one he had used for years when they foraged together or bathed in the river with their young. But she didn't answer. And so, he lowered himself beside her, pressing his massive body close, shielding her from the world. The herd had heard the scream and the bellow and the crashing. One by one, they arrived. Quiet, cautious, reverent. The matriarch came first, her old eyes wide with sorrow. Then the calves, then the others. They formed a circle around Tao and Syrah. Not out of fear, but out of respect. What had just happened was something ancient, something sacred, and far from over. Tao stood over Syrah like a guardian carved from stone, his breath heaving, his sides rising and falling with the weight of grief and rage and something else, disbelief. He nudged her again, softer this time, his trunk tracing the outline of her ear, the curve of her jaw. She was still warm, still there, but unmoving. The rest of the herd stayed back, instinctively giving Tao space. They had never seen him like this, silent, trembling, hollow-eyed. For years he had been the quiet one, the protector. Never a leader, never loud. But now something inside him had cracked wide open, and in that silence the forest began to respond. A single calf, Syrah's youngest, broke from the line. He ambled forward clumsily, eyes wide and wet, and nestled his tiny body against his mother's flank. When she didn't move, he let out a small broken trumpet. Tao lowered his head until it met the calf's. For a moment, neither moved. And then, in the distance, a roar. But it wasn't an animal. It was human. Tao's ears twitched, eyes narrowing toward the jungle's edge. He knew that sound, the shout of men, the clatter of boots, the metallic clang of tools, cutters, poles, restraints, poachers. They had followed the python's trail. Perhaps they had released it near the watering hole to trap whatever was unlucky enough to drink. Syrah had always been curious, too bold for her own good, and now they were coming back. Tao rose slowly, massive, silent. The calf stayed hidden behind his legs. The herd shifted anxiously, some already stepping back, ready to run. But Tao didn't move. He looked down at Syrah one last time, and then toward the noise. His body tensed. The jungle watched, breathless, because whatever came next wouldn't be just about survival, it would be vengeance. Tao took one slow, deliberate step forward. The calf clung to the shadow of his legs, trembling. Behind them, the herd hesitated, torn between flight and loyalty, fear and the pull of something ancient, something primal. In the wild, elephants mourn, but they also remember, and they protect. The underbrush rustled again. Voices clearer now. Laughter. Boots trampling leaves. Metal dragging against earth. Then, one voice. Should be right here. The snake did its job. Tao froze. His trunk curled toward the ground, then coiled upward like a question, then like a threat. The first man stepped through the trees, machete slung low on his hip, rifle strapped across his back. He didn't see Tao at first, not fully. He was scanning for a carcass. Easy money, ivory, bones, maybe even the python. But what he saw instead made him stop breathing. Tao, silent, massive. Eyes locked on his, and right behind Tao, Syrah's body, the python still coiled loose around her, like a forgotten noose. The man whispered, "Oh, my God." Another voice behind him. "What? What is it?" And then, like a storm building in the pit of the earth, Tao let out a sound that shattered everything. Not a trumpet, not a cry, but a scream. It tore through the canopy, shaking leaves from the trees, silencing birds, freezing blood. The man stumbled back, tripping over roots, fumbling for his gun. Too late. Tao charged. Every footstep cracked the ground like thunder. The earth shook with the weight of 14,000 pounds of fury. He wasn't just protecting. He wasn't just grieving. He was delivering a message. And the forest, for the first time in a long time, roared with him. The other elephants began to move. Not frantically, not in fear, but with purpose. A wall of gray and tusks and rage. The herd was behind him now. Not just Tao's grief anymore. It was all of theirs. What had once been prey was now justice. And what came next, no one could have imagined. The poachers scattered. One dropped his weapon as he fled. The other tripped over a fallen branch and scrambled backward like a crab, eyes wide with terror as Tao bore down on him. But Tao didn't strike. He stopped just feet away, his breath coming in ragged bursts, his ears flared wide, his eyes burning with something deeper than rage. Something ancient, something sacred. Behind him, the python began to stir, still wounded, still stunned, but alive. And Tao turned. He wrapped his trunk around Sierra's lifeless form, not forcefully, not as an act of vengeance, but with the tenderness of someone who once knew the rhythm of her breath. He lifted her gently. The herd parted to make way, and with slow, measured steps, Tao carried her away, not to hide her, not to leave her, but to honor her. They moved as one, herd and fallen, calf and protector, into a clearing bathed in early light. The calf whimpered once, and one of the elder females responded with a deep rumble, pressing her trunk softly to its back. Comfort, belonging, a promise that it wouldn't be alone. Back in the brush, the poachers, shaken, breathless, watched in silence, not daring to move, not yet, not after what they'd seen. Because in that moment, the rules of the wild had changed. Predators had failed, grief had spoken, and the earth itself had risen to mourn. The rangers would later find Sierra's body, not discarded, but laid to rest beneath a mound of leaves and branches, arranged with eerie precision. Tao's work, a burial, a tribute. The python was gone, but the message remained. Some bonds, some losses, echo louder than bullets, and some cries never stopped ringing through the trees. Tao stood still, towering over the quiet grave he had made for Sierra. His massive frame, usually a symbol of strength and dominance, now looked hollow, shaped by grief more than muscle. His ears drooped. His tusks, usually weapons of defense, hung motionless, as if mourning their failure to protect her. The calf, still trembling, nudged at the leaves covering its mother. A soft trumpet escaped its trunk. Confused, questioning, Tao lowered his head and gently rested his trunk over the calf's back. That single touch said everything. I am here. I won't leave you. The herd slowly formed a circle around them. No trumpets, no cries, just the silent language of trunks touching trunks. Mourning, unity, resilience. Far at the edge of the trees, one of the rangers who had been tracking poachers from afar stood frozen. Binoculars pressed to his face, heart pounding. He had witnessed the whole event, from Sierra's attack to Tao's roar, from the poachers' retreat to the quiet burial. What he saw wasn't just tragedy, it was something else. Something that couldn't be measured or categorized. A mourning ritual, a funeral, held by elephants. He slowly lowered the binoculars. His radio crackled, a voice asking for status. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained on Tao, now standing tall once more, looking out over the plain, like a silent guardian of the herd. Then unexpectedly, the python returned. Its massive body slithered into view, bruised but very much alive. The herd froze. The calf whimpered. Tao's body tensed, but this time he didn't charge. Instead, he stood his ground, like a warning carved into the earth. The python, perhaps understanding, paused. Its head rose slightly, tongue flicking the air. Then, with slow precision, it turned and disappeared into the tall grass. The moment passed, but its weight lingered. Tao didn't roar. He didn't chase. He simply stood, the wind tugging at his ears, the calf now beside him, mimicking his stillness. Because that day wasn't about vengeance. It was about memory, and the vow that no more would be lost. not while Tao still breathed. Days turned into weeks, and something remarkable began to shift, not just in Tao, but in the entire herd. The calf, who had once refused to eat, now stayed close to Tao's side, copying his every move. When Tao drank, the calf followed. When Tao dusted himself in red clay, the calf playfully rolled beside him. When Tao trumpeted, low and deep, the calf would squeak out a miniature version, like an echo still learning how to be thunder. The herd, sensing this new bond, adjusted their rhythms. The matriarch, though still in charge, gave Tao space to lead. He didn't step into Sira's role, he couldn't, but he did something else, something the savannah hadn't seen in generations. He became the calf's shadow. Every morning, before the sun crested the acacia trees, Tao would circle the clearing, inspecting it for danger. Then he would gently rouse the calf with a nudge of his trunk. They would walk side by side across the golden grasses, Tao's large feet carefully matching pace with the smaller ones beside him. And soon the stories began to spread. Rangers whispered of the bull who had taken on a father's duty. Local guides spoke of the watcher of the plains, an elephant who mourned but never gave up. Tourists caught fleeting images of Tao standing over the calf at dusk, the sunset casting long shadows that looked like two warriors carved from dusk and dust. But perhaps the most powerful image came from one of the youngest rangers, who returned from patrol one evening, eyes wide with something like awe. "I saw them," he said quietly, "the bull and the baby. They were standing at the very spot where she died, just standing, like they were remembering." Silence followed, because everyone knew what he meant. Tao hadn't moved on. He had moved forward, with memory in his bones and a promise in every step. And the calf? He wasn't just surviving. He was learning what it meant to be held, even after everything was lost. And as the seasons shifted from the parched breaths of dry season to the swollen rivers of the rains, Tao and the calf continued their quiet pilgrimage. They didn't speak, of course. Elephants never needed to. Their language was in nudges and pauses, in trunk brushes and the rhythm of footfalls across the savannah. But something deeper was taking root between them. One morning, as a mist clung low over the grasses, the calf stumbled into a shallow ditch. It wasn't deep, just enough to frighten him. He let out a high-panicked trumpet, flailing his legs as dust kicked up around him. Tao was there instantly, not rushing, not frantic. He placed one heavy foot into the ditch beside the calf, then leaned his broad body down and wrapped his trunk underneath the little one's belly. It was a gesture so careful, so impossibly tender, that even the watching herd fell still. With one lift, Tao brought the calf back onto solid ground. The calf turned, dazed, but when his eyes met Tao's, something shifted again. From that day forward, the calf never strayed far. He no longer trailed behind. He walked just beside Tao's right shoulder, like an apprentice beside a master. And for Tao, something old inside him, something Sirah had once awakened, flared to life again. He wasn't just protecting the calf. He was guiding him, showing him how to find water when none could be seen, how to identify the rumble of distant herds, how to recognize danger in the rustle of tall grass or the sudden silence of birds. Tao was raising him, not as a leader, but as a legacy. Sirah had once said that strength wasn't in how loud one roared, but in how deeply one stood beside the fragile. And now, as Tao stood over the calf each night, ears flicking at the distant sounds of predators, he finally understood what she had meant. He couldn't save Sirah from the snake, but he could honor her through every breath the calf took. And as more moons passed, the calf grew stronger, steadier on his feet, bolder in his steps. But he never grew careless. He watched Tao constantly, mimicking the way he flicked his ears at distant sounds, how he tested the wind before stepping into tall grass, how he paused at every waterhole before drinking. The herd, too, began to shift. What was once gentle tolerance became quiet respect. The matriarch, old and wise, began to slow her pace to match theirs. Young bulls, often unruly and restless, would fall silent when Tao rumbled low in mourning. The calf, once a vulnerable shadow trailing behind, was becoming something more, a beacon of resilience shaped by pain, protected by love. One evening, as the herd trekked along the ridge of a valley where the wind whispered through acacia trees, the calf suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. He turned his head toward a thicket on the edge of the path and let out a short, uncertain chirp. Tao halted, eyes narrowing. There in the underbrush lay a baby warthog, abandoned, trembling, too young to run. Some of the younger elephants grew uneasy. Others began to walk past, but the calf didn't move. He looked at Tao, and Tao didn't roar, didn't grunt. He simply walked forward, slowly, and stood between the calf and the others. And the calf understood. He gently lowered his trunk, touched the warthog's side, and stepped back. He didn't force, he didn't drag, he just waited. And after a few moments, the tiny creature stood, shaky, confused, and began to walk, right beside him, just like he once had. The herd murmured. The matriarch watched silently, but no one interfered, because in that moment, they all saw it. Tao hadn't just saved a life. He had passed on a legacy, the kind of strength that doesn't roar, the kind that remembers, the kind that stays. And as the trio, Tao, the calf, and the tiny warthog, moved forward, something almost imperceptible shifted within the herd. Where once there had been a single wounded bull dragging the weight of grief, now walked a protector with purpose. And where there had been a calf raised in the shadow of loss, now strode a young spirit carrying the spark of compassion. Other elephants, curious and tentative, began to take notice. One by one, they slowed to walk beside them. A young female gently tapped the warthog with her trunk in greeting. An elder bull rumbled a low, approving note as he passed. And soon, without a word, the herd widened their path, making space not just for the three, but for what they represented. The days ahead were not without challenge. Drought pressed in from the north, and the land grew harder underfoot. But in every struggle, the herd moved more like a single organism, cohesive, conscious, and surprisingly tender. When a sudden flash flood blocked their migration path, it was the calf who first spotted a safer crossing upstream. When a pride of lions lingered too long on the horizon, Tao's presence alone was enough to turn them away. And when the warthog, frightened by distant thunder, froze on the trail, it was the calf, not Tao, who circled back, placed his trunk around the tiny creature's body, and waited until the shaking stopped. Tao watched from a distance that time, and in his eyes there was something new, pride, but not the kind born of dominance or conquest, the kind born of healing, the kind born when grief becomes wisdom and wisdom becomes action. It wasn't long before Tao found himself doing things he never thought he would again, leading at the front of the herd, nudging the youngest calves when they strayed, standing between danger and the vulnerable without hesitation. His calls, once filled with sorrow, had regained their strength. Not the commanding trumpet of dominance, but something deeper, resonant, grounded. The calf began mimicking Tao's behavior, practicing mock charges with small branches and attempting to lift stones with his trunk. The warthog, ever loyal, trailed behind, darting in and out of the calf's legs like a playful shadow. The three had become an odd yet inseparable trio, watched over by the herd with cautious admiration. But Tao's transformation didn't go unnoticed by the matriarch. One evening, under the dim glow of twilight, she approached him at the edge of a watering hole. Her steps were deliberate, her gaze unwavering. She didn't speak, didn't rumble, didn't bow. She simply stood beside him, two silhouettes reflecting in the water, and waited. Tao, recognizing the gesture, lowered his head in quiet acceptance. And just like that, the mantle he had once cast aside, the unspoken leadership, the emotional compass of the herd, was placed gently back upon his shoulders. Not by force, but by choice. Because in healing others, he had unknowingly healed himself. Tao's presence at the helm began to change the rhythm of the entire herd. He no longer lingered in the shadows or isolated himself when dusk fell. Instead, he walked beside the matriarch during migrations, flanked the mothers with newborns, and taught the younger bulls how to sense shifts in the wind, how to detect danger not by sight but by vibration through the earth. Even the elders, once wary of his silence, began to seek his opinion again, not with deference to a title, but out of respect for what he had become, a survivor who had embraced vulnerability without losing strength. The calf, whom the herd had once doubted would survive, now mirrored Tao's every move. He followed his massive footsteps across the plains, learning how to read the tension in the herd's formation, when to pause near unfamiliar scents, and when to raise his trunk and listen to silence. It wasn't just instinct anymore, it was guidance, and Tao gave it, not with dominance, but with devotion. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high and the air shimmered with heat, a rogue hyena crept toward the herd's rear, drawn by the weakened scent of a limping juvenile. Before the others even noticed, Tao had already positioned himself between the predator and the vulnerable calf. His trumpet tore through the still air, echoing across the grasslands. The hyena hesitated, then fled. Not because of Tao's size, but because of what he represented now, a protector with nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to give. That moment rippled through the herd, and that night, when the elephants gathered beneath the moonlight to sleep in their protective circle, the matriarch let the calf curl beside her. But Tao lay closest to him, not as an outsider anymore, but as family. The bond between Tao and the calf deepened with every sunrise. In the quiet moments, before the wind stirred the grass and the birds began their calls, Tao would nudge the young one awake with his trunk, then guide him to the river's edge. There, in the golden light, they would drink side by side. Tao would teach him not just when to drink, but when to wait, to listen, to feel the world. One morning, the herd encountered a dry stretch of cracked earth where a waterhole had once been. Panic rippled through the elephants, especially the mothers with nursing calves. But Tao, with the calf at his side, didn't flinch. He scanned the terrain, moved to a cluster of tamarind trees, and began to dig. The calf watched, then mimicked, pressing his small feet into the dirt. Others soon joined, and by dusk, a shallow pool shimmered at the base of their trench. The herd drank. Lives were sustained, not just by water, but by trust. The calf, still small and wide-eyed, began to walk differently. His steps more certain, his ears more alert. At night, he would fall asleep against Tao's massive leg, comforted by the rhythmic rise and fall of the bull's breath. But it wasn't only the calf who had changed. Tao, too, seemed lighter. His once heavy silence now felt rooted rather than burdened. When the calf stumbled or grew tired, Tao didn't just protect, he encouraged. When the herd faced moments of tension, distant roars, sudden storms, Tao no longer froze with old memories. He acted, with clarity, with courage. Even the matriarch, wise and steady, began to step back in certain moments, allowing Tao to lead crossings, to choose when they moved and where they rested. It was subtle, but powerful. The herd was not only healing, it was evolving, because Tao had done something no one expected. He had taken his grief and turned it into guidance. And the calf, once the embodiment of loss, had become a symbol of what could still be found: hope. One evening, under a sky brushed with crimson and violet, the calf strayed a little farther than usual. He had grown bolder, curious about everything. A flick of movement in the tall grass caught his eye, and before anyone could stop him, he had followed it, trunk lifted, feet padding softly through the brush. But what he found wasn't a rabbit or a rustling leaf. It was a shadow, thick, coiled, and alive. A massive python, silent and still, lay camouflaged under the dry brush, waiting. And when the calf stepped closer, its body uncoiled like lightning. The snake struck. Its powerful body wrapped around the calf's legs, coiling upward with terrifying speed. The calf let out a shrill trumpet. Panic, confusion, terror all in one. But the constriction was fast, merciless. The herd heard him. They turned in unison. But no one moved faster than Tao. The old bull, who had once frozen at the sound of pain, whose past had paralyzed him for years, let out a roar that cracked through the silence like a whip. Trees trembled, birds scattered, the ground seemed to pulse beneath his feet. And then he charged. With tusks lowered and trunk raised, Tao thundered toward the snake, closing the distance in seconds. The python hissed, tightening its grip, but it never had a chance. Tao's tusks tore into the ground beside it, lifting dust and roots. With one furious swing, he knocked the serpent from the calf's body. He didn't stop. He stomped. He thrashed. He bellowed a sound so primal, so filled with rage and love that even the distant predators paused. When the dust cleared, the python lay motionless. The calf trembled in place, legs shaky, eyes wide. But he was breathing, alive. Tao leaned down, his trunk trembling, and gently touched the calf's forehead. Not just to reassure him, but to reassure himself, because he had done it. He had saved her baby, and this time, he had not been too late. The herd slowly approached, still wide-eyed from the chaos. The matriarch, who had once doubted Tao's place among them, stood still, watching him not with skepticism, but something far deeper. Respect. The younger elephants gathered around the calf, their trunks brushing softly against his sides, checking him for wounds, offering comfort in the only way elephants knew how, through touch and presence. But it was the calf's gaze that lingered the longest on Tao. In those wide, dark eyes was something more than gratitude. It was trust. He didn't flinch from Tao's touch. He didn't cry out. Instead, he leaned into the old bull's trunk and let out the smallest, most fragile rumble, a sound Tao hadn't heard in decades. It was the same sound his mate's calf had once made, before everything had gone wrong. Tao's eyes glistened. That night, they didn't return to the riverbed. They stayed close, forming a protective ring around the calf and Tao. And when the moon rose, casting its pale light across the savannah, the herd slept, except for Tao. He stood watch, like he used to. Only now there was no guilt in his heart, no ghost trailing behind him, only peace and purpose. Because for the first time in years, he had stepped into the roar of fear and answered it not with silence, but with strength. And the herd, they knew. The old bull who once mourned alone in the trees was gone. In his place stood a guardian. But being a guardian didn't mean the danger was over. The pitton's body was still coiled in the grass, motionless. But Tao didn't trust stillness. He stepped forward, carefully placing one foot near the snake's head. The massive coils twitched, alive. The calf let out a startled cry. In an instant, Tao lifted his leg and brought it down with thunderous force. Once, twice, until the earth seemed to vibrate beneath him. The snake's body went limp for good this time, the fight completely gone. Tao didn't turn away. He waited for the earth to settle, waited for the fear to drain from the herd's eyes. Only when the calf let out a soft, unsure trumpet, an attempt to mimic the adults, did Tao take a slow breath. He turned toward the others, not expecting anything, but what he saw made him freeze. The matriarch had lowered her head, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to tell him that the exile was over. The young bulls stepped aside as he passed. Mothers nudged their calves gently toward him, not in fear, not in caution, in reverence. The herd moved as one that night, and Tao walked in the middle, not behind, not on the edges, but at the center, where leaders stood. He didn't speak, he didn't trumpet, he didn't have to, because the calf was alive. And Tao had chosen not to run from pain this time, but to step into it with all his strength. As dawn broke over the savannah, the light caught the glint of dew on the grass and the blood-smeared dust on Tao's tusks. The air, still and golden, held a quiet reverence, as if nature itself recognized what had happened in the night. The young calf walked beside him now, occasionally bumping into his leg, like he wasn't quite sure where he belonged, but hoping it might be here. Tao didn't flinch. He let the contact happen. That small, unsure presence beside him felt like redemption. The herd paused near a watering hole, and the elders watched as the calf approached the edge. He dipped his trunk awkwardly, learning by instinct, trying to drink like the others. Tao stepped forward and lowered his own trunk to guide him, just once, then backed away. It was a small gesture, but in the language of elephants, it was everything. Behind them, the lifeless body of the python was already being claimed by vultures. But no one looked back. Tao had walked alone for so long, through shame, through silence, through the unbearable ache of having failed the only elephant who had once believed in him. But last night, in the dark, he had become something else. Not a warrior, not a savior. Something simpler, stronger, a father figure. And for the first time in years, He didn't walk with his head down. He walked with purpose, and beside him, a future he never thought he'd be part of. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes the loudest cries come from the quietest hearts, and the strongest bonds are born from unimaginable loss.